Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. My name is Nandy Nelson, and if you are new here, welcome. I hope that you decide to join our community by clicking the subscribe button. Today, I will be discussing with you all how to prepare for your first client intake. This is an exciting time, so if you want to learn more, please be sure to stick around. And just as a disclaimer, it's going to be a little bit of a long one, so just bear with your girl because I got you covered. When you are preparing for your first client or your first client intake, there are a few things that you need, all right? So in general, you need consents and you need some type of policies and procedures, and you have to determine what type of way you want to deliver these items, right? So are you going to be paper-based and print them off and send them in the mail and then have your client send them back? Are you going to have the information be available via fax? Are you going to have a drop-off system? Or are you going to have the client fill out and complete the paperwork at the time of session? What will be your process? Or will you utilize an electronic method such as like DocuSign, HelloSign, things of that nature? The first thing that you will need is a client intake form. So when you have a client intake form, you may opt into holding a phone conversation with the client and going through the intake form with them. You may do it via Zoom, or you may do it in person, or you may provide it to the family, have them complete the form, and then once they return it, if there's any questions or additional information that you may need, then you can go over it at that moment in time. However, within that client intake, you do need background information. So if you're servicing children, you will need the background information on the child. So that may be just also including some demographic information. How old are you? What's your name? What's your birthday? Where do you live? What's your phone number? You'll also need demographic information on the parent that is signing up for services and or the parent that is, the secondary parent as well. You also need to know, again, if you're working with children or minors, if there's any type of custody agreements in place and what is that custody agreement. So then you'll know, it may be mom or dad says, hey, I don't want you talking to mom or dad or telling them about anything as it relates to services. But if the custody agreement states that you as the provider have to share information, then you have to follow the agreement. So be sure to make sure that you ask that as well in your intake information if you service minors. The other piece that is important is any type of health information, whether that be any type of additional diagnosis. If it is that the client that you're working with is diagnosed, when did they get diagnosed? Who was a diagnosing physician? Are there any type of health concerns, allergies, surgeries, operations, anything health related? In addition to what was the pregnancy like for the mom, were there any complications at birth for mom? So all of that information you want to have in that client intake packet, because it can tell you a lot about the client. It can tell you a lot about their family dynamic and things like that. You also want to know if there are any other mental health concerns or that either the client may have or that may run in the family. Who cares for the child, or are there any type of spiritual values that you should be aware of, cultural values or traditions or practices? What is the race or ethnicity of the individual? So all those kind of bleed into the category of kind of like background information on a client, but it's very important that you do know this information so that you're aware as a provider and you have a clear picture as to what you may have to program for or treat as it relates to the potential client that you'll be servicing. The other piece you want to know is school. Like, is the client in school? If they are in school, do they have an IEP or a 504 plan or no plan at all? Or do they have a favorite subject in school? Do they have a least favorite subject in school? So all those things really help you to gain more information about your client. You also want to know if there are any other services that your client may have. So is it that your client attends outpatient therapy, or if it is that a client has received ABA services in the past, or whatever type of service you provide in the past, and really trying to understand, okay, so if you received this service in the past, why is it now that you're seeking services at this time, or why did you end services? The other piece that you want to include is the skill level. You want to have a baseline of where the kid or the individual that you're working with may be prior to you implementing and agreeing to do an assessment and moving forward with those services. And then also, what are some of their needs? So why is it that you are seeking services at this time? And if you are seasoned, I should say, in the ABA space, or maybe in psychotherapy, as you go along with a client, you find that there are new things or other things that you can be working on. And sometimes you can lose sight of the initial reason as to why someone came for services with you in the first place. So you really want to make sure that you're clear on the needs and why it is that that individual is seeking services. Last thing that relates to the client intake form would be the schedule and the availability of services. So you want to have a ballpark as to what is the parent's overall understanding of what the service is, what is their general availability for services, and what is that frequency that they have in their mind as it relates to services, because that can also tell you if you'll have the capacity or not to service that individual, or if we need to have a conversation about what the service is that is being offered and what may be the average or what may be the norm as it relates to services. So I'll take a pause here and speak very briefly as it relates to my experience. I find that oftentimes if families are new to the ABA space or they don't really understand what ABA therapy is, they associate it a lot with maybe early intervention, if their child had early intervention, or they may associate it more so with the frequency of speech therapy, OT, or just counseling. And as we may know, that some of those services may not be a daily service. Some of those services may be once a week, twice a week for 45, 50 minutes, 30 minutes. And sometimes when parents are educated on what ABA therapy is, it may not be something that they're able to commit to because in their mind, they wanted to have services at a lesser level of a frequency than what may be medically necessary for their child. The next one you want in your client intake process is the financial responsibility. So now we're kind of gravitating and moving over to the consent side of things. So say, for example, everything is great, client intake checked out, you all are in agreement that you're in alignment, you can service that client, it is within your scope of practice and expertise, and the family or the individual is on board, ready to go. The first consent that you should have is a financial responsibility. So this is a consent that helps the family to understand what are the responsibilities for themselves as the person receiving those services. What is it that you will be doing as it relates to billing for those services or invoicing for those services? And if there is no coverage for the services, then who is responsible? The next one that I have here is an assessment consent. So for the ABA space, it is imperative that we are receiving consent to conduct an assessment. Obviously, we may think, oh, well, the parent brought them here, so they're consenting to us doing this because they're here. However, it's important that we have consent to engage in a specific evaluation or a specific assessment. And if it is that we are going to maybe at a later down the line, once the prospective client is actually a client, once we decide to maybe do other types of assessments or analysis with that particular individual or child, it's important for you to also get another consent to conduct a particular assessment or analysis at that point as well. The other piece I have here is consent to treat a minor. So sometimes it may be that the parent is not present, there may be another guardian, or there may be another person that is responsible for that child when their legal guardian or their parent is absent. So we also gain consent to treat a child if a parent is not present. I also have a consent to provide services during COVID. So we want to make sure that all of our families are aware of the risks that are associated with providing services during COVID and what it is that we will have as expectations when we are providing those services. This kind of also goes into a little bit of a glimpse of the policy section that we really didn't get to yet, but we also have a policy as well as it relates to COVID and what our expectations are of our staff, what our expectations are of the families, and what it is that we will do as the next steps if it is that there is a positive exposure to COVID. All right, so the next one I have here is emergency contact. Whether it is that you're providing services in a center-based or office location, community, or home, you also want information for emergency contacts for the individuals that you are servicing. For our emergency contact, we have an option for them to list as many family members as they need to, or those that they believe should be called in case of an emergency. We also want information on their height. We also want information on their weight and any type of allergies they have, medications. That should also be in the health section that I mentioned above. I forgot to add that, but the client intake should talk about medications and all that too. But in this section also is a place where all that information can be listed so that we're having everything kind of in one snapshot if it is a case of an emergency where we need to make contact with someone who may not be the legal guardian or the parent. We also have the communicable disease consent form. So this is a form that we send out prior to any face-to-face services. So we want to make sure that there has been no exposure to communicable diseases prior to us meeting face-to-face with that client. So that is something that we do, as well as a HIPAA joint privacy notice. So we want to make sure that all of the families are aware of HIPAA and what that means for them, what that means for us, and also typically we'll pair our HIPAA notice and information with any types of releases of information, as well as any type of coordination of care documentation. Also, we have an email/text communication consent. So there are many risks that are associated with sending emails or text communication. So we also have our families opt into it or not. They let us know, or one or the other, and also just explain to them what are some of the risks of communicating with us via email and or via text. Next one we have is more so geared towards home-based therapy, but we do have a home expectations checklist, and these are the things that we expect in the home, and also gives the parents somewhat of an idea as to what it is that we'll be looking for when we are in the home. And I also have, for the center-based setting, a drop-off policy. So if it is that a parent will be dropping off their child to services, we have a policy as it relates to who is it that is able and allowed to drop off your child. We also collect IDs and contact information, as well as what are the parameters as it relates to drop off. We also have a Wi-Fi request. So this is something that we use in the home setting. If it is that we are utilizing the parent's Wi-Fi for our electronic devices, because again, we do collect data electronically. We also have a dietary restriction form that we utilize specifically in the center setting, so that we know if there are any dietary restrictions. Most of the ones that I will list now are more so for center-based. We have a medical release and consent. So if it is that there is a medical emergency, we do have a consent where we want to know if the child is allergic to any types of medications, if there is the need for ambulatory services. Is it okay for their child to get in an ambulance if we can't contact the parent, or if it's kind of like a serious matter, is it okay for us to take them to the emergency room or them to get in an ambulance? We also have a release for, or I should say a consent for playing outside. So if it is that they want their children to play outside, we have a form that the parents sign. We also have a holiday exposure notice and consent. So some parents may not want their children to be exposed to specific holidays. We also have a bathroom consent. So if it is that a child is receiving services and the parent isn't present, more so specifically in the center-based setting, is it okay for us to change the child's diaper if necessary and things like that? We have is a parent handbook and policies and procedures manual. So that also goes through all of our expectations that we have from our parents, and very clear on what it is that we expect from them, what it is that we will do as providers, and literally everything that they need to know as it relates to services with us. So there is no room for confusion or error, even though sometimes there is some confusion that happens. So we have to oftentimes refer some of our families back to the manual. And the last thing that we do is a risk assessment as an overall way for us to understand if it is that this client that we may be working with may be higher risk or not. And that can also help us to understand if it is that, you know, we may need to have a different level of service that we're providing. I know I said this is gonna be a long one, so if you stuck around, thank you all for sticking around with me. If you have a different process that you utilize, I would love to hear it in the comments below. So please feel free to drop your process or drop what you're thinking about or ask any questions. But just as a quick tip, as you are growing and accepting clients and things like that, you may change the type of consents that you have, and that is a-okay. And you may change and refine your policies, and that is also a-okay. So thank you all again so much for watching. Please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, I will catch you all in the next video. Bye for now.